Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name's Andrew Jack from the Financial Times, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you today to our discussion around responsible business education. A reminder that you can read and watch many more details of our awards today and our wider coverage on this issue if you go to ft.com/RBE. We're going in a minute to announce the details of the awards and then go into a discussion with some key representatives of different part of the space, from business, from the world of education, from alumni of business schools, researchers, and beyond. We're very keen also to hear your views, all of you are listening, so do please post your reflections and comments in the chat function, and towards the end of the hour we'll try to draw particularly on some of those issues to our panelists. But briefly, let me introduce our partner, Andre Hoffman from Roche and from InTent to say a few words of introduction.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. This is a great day. It's a very important conversation we're having, and it's wonderful to see that there is so much attention in the subject. Maybe I just can give as a way of introduction the fact that I did myself study, I did do an MBA more than 30 years ago now. And at the time when I was studying that MBA, I was taught what management properly is. Management is maximizing short-term profit. This used to be the real metrics that everybody could use to identify if we are going to be successful going forward with our projects, with our ideas, in fact, with society. And I'm very glad to say that we are now getting to a small change into the way we can do these things. And that conversation is particularly important if you put it into that context. In the outside world, we have realized that focusing just on one simple metric is not enough to guarantee success and to guarantee the business development as we really need it. I think that the important issue here is that we are just measuring the wrong thing. You know, this is an accounting problem. We are measuring just financial flows when we know that, in fact, what's important is the impact our businesses are having. And this impact on social systems, on human talent, and on natural system. This is more and more apparent with the booster that we got from the pandemic, but it is also an important opportunity. If we can use the entrepreneurial drive that characterizes management, and in particular business management, we should be able to create the virtual circle we should be aspiring to. What we need is sustainable prosperity, and we will not get that in the current system if we don't adapt the way we measure success. Success means positive impact on the social capital, on the human capital, and on the natural capital. And the interdependencies between these capitals are really what are going to help us to create a sustainable prosperity. Just sustainable prosperity is indispensable because, you know, I was born in 58. When I was born, there were about 3 billion people on the planet. We are 8.5 now. We might be 10 before I die. If we do not succeed in managing the resources, and I insist on the fact that these are also social and human resources, if we don't manage that in the best possible way, we will not get to this sustainable prosperity which we really want to. So businesses across the planet, who are the big recruiters of the business school output, if you can put it this way, are realizing that more and more, and they're realizing it mostly because of free tendencies. Customers are more and more complaining about the fact that they want businesses that deliver the goods and services they need based on purpose and not just on the best possible deal. Recruiting talent is getting more and more difficult. I mean, when we recruit in our company, we get an awful lot of people telling us, well, you know, what's the purpose of the company? For us, it's simple. The purpose of the company is doing today what the patient needs tomorrow. Not possible to execute this purpose without sustainability. And then thirdly, I would add the whole regulatory field. I saw with great interest the letter that Larry Fink has just, the chairman of BlackRock, has just written to all the company which BlackRock invests in. And I think he puts it very well. This is not about protecting the system as we know it. This is not about doing something for the environment. This is about sustainable, responsible capitalism looking forward in a way which will help to dispatch the fiduciary duty that people like BlackRock have towards their investors. So we are talking a different language. We are not just saying we need to change things. We are actually walking working forward to create a new opportunity. Maybe I'll leave it at that, and I'm really very much looking forward to the conversation we're having today, because as I said, I think this is very important.
Andre, thanks very much. Very, very helpful framing. So now we're going to take a short video to announce the winners of the Responsible Business Education Awards. There are 3 categories that were all judged by a series of external and internal judges. One around societally relevant academic research, one around teaching cases focused on climate and sustainability, and the third around alumni change makers within existing organizations or those with their own startups. So let's watch the video, please. The FT's Responsible Business Education Awards recognise outstanding work by researchers, teachers and alumni of business schools making an impact around sustainability and social purpose. The first award recognises 4 academic projects addressing societal challenges with evidence of impact. Enrico Biffis at Imperial College and colleagues used big data to develop agricultural crop insurance in Tanzania, offering greater security to smallholders. Fiona Marshall at Sussex University and colleagues worked on recycling urban waste in India to reduce toxic emissions and preserve the livelihoods of waste pickers. Sendil Mulanathan and colleagues at Chicago identified racial bias in algorithms used by US health insurers, leading to changes by the sector and policymakers. Srihari Sridhar at Texas A&M and colleagues applied machine learning techniques from marketing to persuade more patients at risk of cancer to be screened. The second FT Responsible Business Education Award recognised 4 teaching cases on climate and sustainability. Robert Strand and colleagues at the University of Berkeley described Patagonia's efforts to become carbon neutral by 2025 by cutting emissions while still growing the company. Saida Masia Kumar at ICFAI in Hyderabad analysed SC Johnson's policies to reduce plastic waste in the oceans with recyclable packaging. Ryan Merrill and colleagues at Singapore Management University explored Alipay's Ant Forest app to incentivise lower carbon lifestyles with tree planting programmes. Amy Moore and colleagues at the University of Pretoria explored the Abelana Game Reserve's ecotourism model that benefits the local community. The third award recognised 4 business school alumni changemakers in startups or in existing organisations. George Bogos from Chicago created Autism in Motion clinics to support families in rural America. Elisa Dierix from INSEAD launched the Mayo Biodiversity Foundation in Cape Verde to manage natural resources with the local community. Gaetano Lapenta from the Polytechnic University of Milan started Fibra to improve air quality, ventilation and energy efficiency. Joanna Barr from IE Business School formed Traceless to produce a sustainable alternative to single-use plastics. The winners of all 3 categories pointed to promising advances towards responsible business education. Congratulations to all of them. Excellent. So some really impressive laureate from our first round of awards. So well done to all of you. And let me turn, first of all, actually perhaps to Elisa, one of the alumni change award makers. Just tell us very briefly a little bit about your project.
Sure. So the Mayo Biodiversity Foundation is an NGO on the island of Mayo in Cape Verde. And we do all aspects of nature conservation on the island, from protecting turtles from poachers to helping the government manage natural reserves on the islands, to sustainable bed and breakfasts, ecotourism opportunities for the local communities. And we're super excited that the Financial Times is organizing this because, well, conservation is a very depressing job. Things are not going well for the planet, and working in this field day in, day out, with few wins far in between, and now seeing that the business community is enthusiastic about this and that we're all working on this together, it's incredibly motivating for us.
And just tell us very briefly, Elisa, so you were part of a cohort of students that was obviously very motivated to not simply go into, as Andre was saying earlier, profit maximization, but to think about alternative ways to use your skills. How widespread was that sense of a greater purpose amongst your peers when you were studying and since?
Well, I'll tell you very honestly, I thought starting the MBA, I thought, oh, I'm going to be the only extremist tree hugger on campus. And some of my colleagues from NGO said, oh, Elisa, you're going from the real sharks in Mayo to the business sharks of the MBA. But we were very wrong. This was a prejudice. And a lot of the other students of the MBA are very passionate about those topics. And to have, to check it wasn't just my impression. Before this event, I did a little survey amongst my fellow students from my cohorts, and I got a lot of very passionate responses about environmental sustainability.
Thanks so much. So, Enrico, let me also just turn briefly to you as another one of our award winners from the academic research side. In a couple of sentences, just tell us a little bit more, excuse me, about your initiative.
Yeah, thank you very much for this wonderful award. I'm extremely pleased for moderators in East Africa. So we use AI and remote sensing satellite data and solutions to smallholder farmers. And I think the key idea as a device to promote access to purchase battery. So great for colleagues who have been met to make it happen.
And in terms of this sort of sense of pressure and demand for change, how much do you see amongst your colleagues within both Imperial and more generally in the business school sector, a demand to do more around societally relevant research?
Maybe I can share my very lucky we benefit from the proximity natural sciences, engineering, and we over the years are pushed to work towards big perspective, just because big problems require that's typically not found in any particular area of the. And the response was sometimes enthusiastic, but now things are complete counterparts, students, businesses, and to deliver effective solutions. So everyone now understands for zone and try to work on solution real impact.
Okay, thanks, Enrico. We're having a little bit of problem with your sound. Perhaps you might try to sign off and sign back on again to clarify that. But Andre, let me turn now back to you. You made some pretty powerful comments at the start about your own experience in business school and how it's changed. How much do you feel, you're still a bit of an outlier, or how much do you think that now the business sector, as the recruiter, as a kind of a client that's interested in the thought leadership coming out of business schools, as someone who perhaps engages with schools for ongoing and executive training, how much do you think that business demand for a wider set of skills and values coming out of business schools is in the mainstream now?
Well, and thank you very much for the question. First, I would like to express some sympathy to Elisa. When I was doing my year MBA in 1990, the same feeling came back all the time. Yes, we love the country, we love the planet, we love the place, we need to do something. And then comes the day when you do the interview for the next job, and you go to the one that pays most. You go to the one that pays most because you've taken some debt on, and because you also want to have this power, which is expressed by the quality of your salary, and that power allows you to make a change as well, of course. We were talking about business schools ranking. The ranking still given huge importance to the salary lift you get by the entrance and the exit of the program. But we are all in this together, and it is quite clear that we cannot change the pressure that humanity is putting on social, on social, humans, and natural system if we don't start managing for impact. What I was trying to say in our remarks is that we are noticing that the number of things that we are seeing in business are not as successful as they could be because we focus on the too narrow measurement. The idea of measuring just the financial success is, it's like looking at a huge problem through a narrow lens, and this is something that needs to change. Now, businesses who are attuned to their customers and who are attuned to their marketplaces are realizing that the current system is not resilient enough for any endemic shock. This is a question, very much a question of risk management. In top management decisions, you have to do two big decisions. One is asset allocation, and the other one is risk management. Now, today, we allocate assets based on financial return, and that doesn't manage the proper risk. The pandemic has demonstrated that very clearly. One single virus has destroyed the whole system, whereby we knew that this virus was coming. The pandemic sent us a number of warning signs before. There were a couple of other attempts. Now we know that there is a nature loss risk. We know that we also need that climate is changing. So start continuing to negotiate, to run a business without taking this risk into account and trying to moderate them is, I think, futile. It's a little bit like driving a car without having an insurance. It's fine if you don't have a crash, but when you have a crash, you're in real trouble. And I think that's something we haven't really sort of built into this. And why? Because we don't have the proper management system, the proper managers form to this thinking, and also we don't measure the right thing. And I think once we have the impact measurement in place, we can unleash this incredible power of entrepreneurship. We can do a lot of things with businesses to change the platform. And yes, Andrew, when I speak like this, I have the impression sometimes that I'm speaking on my own, but it's changing. The pandemic has really, really accelerated.
So, Ilian Mihalf, you're head of INSEAD, very much in the front line of a lot of these issues. How far does that resonate with you? Are you feeling a lot of external pressures, including from the business sector, from employers, to identify students with these new sets of skills and values?
I think that we have seen a lot of change, but before I talk about all this, first, Andrew, I want to praise you for what you have done. I really appreciate having this forum and having this responsible business education report, because I remember when we met for the first time, I was told Andrew cares a lot about sustainability, but it was like 5-6 years ago. So finally, we can see now this product, which I think it is very important. And I'll talk a little bit of why this is important. It is important because if you look at the runner-ups, if you look at the winners, if you look actually at what we have done at INSEAD in terms of research cases, there is already so much work that is going on, but we don't know about this. We do not share enough of this data and this research. So hopefully this forum will help with the exchange of ideas and learning. I think that we are on the cusp of changing in a big way management education and integrating a lot of these ideas into the mainstream. I would say that we started, I started as a dean in 2013. So I was pressured by a lot of alumni you have to do more about sustainability. You have to put more into the curriculum. And I tried, and I talked to colleagues. There was not much interest. There were maybe a dozen of colleagues who were actually pioneers in this area, but out of 150 faculty members, you cannot move a lot with 12 colleagues. Today, I would say that you can look at the papers on our website. We have about 50 papers just last year in our sustainability report. More than half of the faculty in every single department are working on this issue. So there's a change on the faculty side, there's a change in the student side, and there's a change, fortunately, on the company side, because I think that the biggest issue that we're facing, maybe business schools were behind. I would admit that probably we were behind, and we're behind in doing all this, what we needed to do in order to change mindsets. But from a rational point of view, if the companies do not ask students, what do you know about sustainability? How will you change business model in order to be more sustainable, higher on that principle, it's very difficult to make an impact. Unfortunately, I think that we see this happening. So I really like your question, because we have our responsibility as a business school, all business schools, but also companies have a responsibility to say, this is important for us. And we want the students who graduate from business schools to be able to address these issues.
And Ilian, sometimes people might say, well, obviously, business school is still a very expensive proposition for most in terms of the fees. Obviously, still the core appetite, as you say, for many students coming out is to go into the more classic, whether it's banking or consulting or now tech, but perhaps traditional businesses, not necessarily in terms of their sector and activities, but certainly focused on profit more than society. Is there a contradiction there, or how can one provide for both sorts of skill sets and values?
There is no contradiction. In fact, I got a suggestion about 2-3 years ago. We've been talking at INSEAD, business as a force for good, business and society, for the last 7-8 years. So we have been trying to push this agenda. And some colleagues were saying, maybe we should start screening the students, so admit only the students who care about this. My answer is no. Actually, we want to do exactly the opposite, because if we only change the social entrepreneurs, and if we only change all these people who create their own companies to address all this, the rest of the GDP, which is 99.9% in the banking industry, consulting, all these other industries, will not change and will not move one bit. So the objective is to take all these students, send them to the investment banks and consulting companies and so on, but with a different mindset, because we have to change all of the industries. We cannot just hope that on the fringes, if we change something, the world will change.
So relevant skills, but different values, perhaps even in mainstreamed employers, is one key from business schools. But Elisa, coming back to you. So I suppose the issue ultimately is what were the skills or the values or the kind of the other benefits that you had going through a business education, you think, that enabled or empowered you to be able to deliver more now in your activities today?
Yeah, I think Ilian made a really, really good point about having all these different backgrounds within the same cohort and this constant exchange of skills, but also opinions, ethics, all of these things. So on my side, very clear, not coming at all from a business background. So courses in organizational behavior or marketing, extremely useful for nature conservation, for passing on our message, for how to run the NGO, very practical, very helpful strategy as well. On INSEAD has for every cohort a Master Strategist Day, where students with their mentors from Bain analyze the company, often an NGO, and then provide strategic recommendations for the organization. So after I graduated, I worked together with 2 professors from INSEAD, Professor Stern and Professor Miron Spector, on doing this for my own NGO. And so getting all these insights from students from very, very different backgrounds was very valuable to us. And vice versa, it goes both ways. And I'm not saying that in a judgmental way, because I was clueless about accounting and all of these things. So, but vice versa, I met students who for example, didn't believe in climate change, and these conversations were very, very good for both of us. Or a lot. INSEAD is in the middle of Fontainebleau forest, and a lot of students who were a bit scared actually about going for a walk in the forest. It's not a place they feel comfortable in. So very basic things like going for walks in the forest or identifying birds. I'm an ornithologist. So really both ways, this exchange of knowledge, opinions, very important.
Do you think actually there's almost a case to rebrand business schools as management schools? So a slightly different frame and skill set. Elisa?
I'm very happy to have been exposed to not just those skills, but to really more broadly all of it.
From business.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
So let's, Andre, please come in.
I just think that it's important here to really make sure that we take everybody along. This is not about NGO doing good and businesses doing bad. The people who work in businesses are not there; they're not intent in destroying the planet. And the people in the NGOs are not the only one responsible into making sure that the planet functions well. We are all in this together. And it's very important to realize that it's not how you spend the money that matters; it's how you make it. So businesses at the onset of the wealth that is then needed to deal with the consequences of the creation of the same wealth have a responsibility. They cannot just shift off on NGOs. They have to live that themselves. And that's why we need managers who understand what it is to deal with the outside world and not just say, not my problem is to make money, other problems will be left to humanity. And so very interesting to hear Elisa talking about her NGO, coming from the NGO background, and then going back into conservation. I mean, these are skills that every human being should be able to apply.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move to a little bit talking about some of the continuing challenges or blockages to doing more in this space. Maybe Enrico, I'll come back to you briefly, both as a teacher and a researcher. How easy is it to reorient around the skills and the values that we've been talking about, both when you're trying to teach students coming through, but also in your own academic research?
So I think most successful devices, the proper use of research centers for us over the last few years, and research the customary way so as to promoting the research, focusing on knowledge integration with students. There really is a big demand to solutions to problems. There is from corporate partners. And so they break down the barriers between disciplines, but also between the moment, the way we see them working is essentially to speak to the outside world, try to provide, of course, a more academic framework, quantify the relevant trade-offs to students and allow them actually to be part of this. And it's largely demand-driven, making everyone trying to make to move out of their comfort zone and to make a contribution, no matter how might be. One's satisfaction is just incredible.
Okay, thanks. And Ilian, really coming back to you with the same question. So I'm getting thank you, Enrico. Getting a little echo. So just to give us a sense, really, of what you see as the challenges in trying to integrate a lot of the new values and issues we've been talking about into both teaching and research.
Well, I think that initially the issue was, are there people who want to do this? You know, at the end of the day, if the faculty don't want to do that, then it's an issue. Today, that's not a constraint, and we should appreciate this, because otherwise we would be, I think I would be very scared where we're heading. Today, there are many people who want to do something, introduce these topics into the curriculum. To me, the biggest issue is very simple. We have several very nice frameworks, whether you look at strategy, whether you look at finance and accounting, in economics and so on. But we're still in the process of building across these fields a comprehensive, but maybe also individual discipline-specific framework for integrating sustainability and caring not only about your financial returns in the short run, as Andrew was putting in, but also thinking about what is your impact on the society and on the environment. So this mindset, including these kind of frameworks, are still a bit challenging in terms of being built. Once we have them, it will be much easier. And I sometimes I tell this story because I talk to a lot of our alumni, and many of them care about the society, about unemployment, about poverty, about environment. One of our alums, who is a CEO of a very large company, was so frustrated that everybody was asking him about, what are you doing now on ESG, this, ESG, that? And that's a person who cares about ESG. But he said, I could not manage my company because they're breathing on my neck, with all these questions. And then I realized, this is our failure. In the same way in which I can give you a marketing, 4Ps or some other framework to think about what to do, or a set of tools, we should be able to give a set of tools of how do you deal with these problems in your company. And this is the biggest challenge. I think that once we have this, we have to create value for companies. If we don't create value for companies, companies will go bankrupt. But in the process of value creation, we have to think, what is the impact on the environment, on natural capital, and what is the impact on the society? And that's where the big question is.
Yes, and Andre, you talked excuse me, you talked earlier about that issue of the accounting frameworks, thinking about different and more effective ways to measure the wider value. Do you see enough ideas coming out of whether it's academia or from businesses themselves around that we can move towards some greater consensus or intellectual frameworks to crystallize this thought going forwards?
Yeah, I think Ian makes a very important point that the aim of the business school, be it a manager, be it an administrator, whichever language you want to use, is to use the resources which are scarce by definition to make sure that it brings a benefit to society. Society, your customers, but also the regulators and stakeholders in a broader sense. So we need to come back with new ideas, and the fact that we are at a moment where new technologies allow us to look at things in a slightly different way, where we have much more transparency and much more capacity at analyzing big trends, this is the right moment to start asking this sort of question, because in a very simple way, if you ask the right questions, you are very likely to get the right answers. Until now, we have asked the wrong question. We have just focused on a model which is an immediate development. The model of the economists in the early 70s, value creation as a paradigm. We need to change that, and a lot of the thinking process that we are seeing coming out of business schools are going in that direction, because you can see that it's not going to, the status quo is just not an option. The cost of inaction will be far too big, and as we all know, humanity performs better under duress, and now there is a clear opportunity in front of us to do things differently. So, in answer to your question, Andrew, yes, I do think that there are new thought process coming out, because now that we have agreed to the broad issue, we need to sort of go into the granularity of it. How can we continue to create the condition for a sustainable prosperity? And we will need to be able to measure it, or we will be able to conceptualize it, and I think we are going that way.
And Enrico, it's sometimes said that a lot of promotion of faculty is still based on perhaps slightly reductive metrics, kind of publication in prestigious peer-reviewed journals, but which often aren't necessarily oriented towards practical applications, or there isn't always the incentive for academics to go beyond their initial valuable research, but then really engage to try to embed it and see it being implemented. Do you see any barriers there where there is potential for reform that would incentivize more applicable as well as sustainable related research?
No, well, this is certainly a very important issue, especially for young researchers. We see change happening. There is a stronger and stronger focus on impact now, luckily. I think there needs to be a recognition that working on certain issues requires a considerable investment in terms of engaging with different stakeholders coming from different disciplines, also working with people in different sectors to understand how solutions can actually be tailored to be extremely effective. So I think gradually there is this understanding. It's now impacting, for example, the way in which research is assessed, moving away, for example, from a very narrow list of journals, trying to accommodate in some way research that by its nature is more multidisciplinary, and hence finds a very difficult an allocation to a particular home. And but this is clearly a long journey, right? And it will require contributions from everyone, and a greater understanding also how to define rankings, for example, and to measure impact.
Andre, were you going to say something as well? Did you want to come back up?
No, I misunderstood that. The question was asked to me, but I mean, this idea of measuring impact is of course key to all this. If you really want to be able to manage, you need to be able to measure, and the combination of the combination of new technologies and the reality of the of the facing us in the face. Sorry, a bit of a circular argument. The obviousness of what's happening is of course making a difference.
And Elisa, I mean, one of the other aspects, of course, in teaching, which is core to many, if not most, business schools, is case studies, the teaching case method, one aspect of our awards. I don't know whether your feeling when you went through was, there's often a critique, isn't there, that a lot of the teaching cases that are used are still quite traditional. They often have, more classic profit maximizing, US-based, white male, aging chief executives as their protagonists. Do you feel there was a need, or there is a need, to use the case method, but to have a much more diverse range of insights and approaches and geographies and issues as part of that process?
Yeah, I think the case method is perfect to address some of these problems. It gives real life examples of how things can be different. So it's almost a sort of role model. I think they played that role as well. And again, I'm referring to that little survey that I did before coming here. That was in the top 3 things requested most by my fellow students was more cases, recent ones. They insisted on recent, on the topic of sustainability. If possible, having the characters, the protagonists of the cases come speak and share their experience as well, to really put faces and make it all real and possible.
And Liliane, from your perspective, do we still need a greater variety of approaches in teaching cases, or are there other methods, capstone projects and initiatives and so on, that could be channeled to developing some of those most relevant skills?
Well, I mean, I think that the case method has proven to be a very effective way of learning about practices. I think that today, and I think that there was a question about the digital world and whether it can help us, the digitalization. And I think that you create an enormous variety of different pedagogical methodologies. So, for example, at INSEAD, we pioneered virtual reality cases. Virtual reality cases are different from a written case because what you observe, nobody tells you, nobody writes to you, look at this, or he said this, she said that, and so on. You observe, and the way you turn, what you look at, will determine what you see. And it's much more real and much more immersive than reading a case. So the case is actually the first immersive tool of teaching, but the virtual reality cases are offering also another alternative. So we have a bunch of those that are very interesting. So these tools will continue developing. I think that we can continue, looking at other alternatives. But I saw that there was a question on the public sector. Andrew, if you allow me to address this, because I think it's a very, very important question. So the question is whether the public sector should not take up on this rather than, the private sector. And I'm an economist, so that's how we think, in economics. There is a market failure, there is an externality, then you have taxes, subsidies, to get the marginal social benefit and the marginal private cost and whatever, to equal. So we have been trying this, we have been doing this. And I still think that governments have a very important role to play. But what we have recognized, and I think that the UN Global Compact was probably the first significant movement in that direction, is that business cannot stand on the side. That regulators will come in and say, you do this, you do that. You know what? If business does not take it seriously, they'll figure out a way of going around regulation, going to another country, doing something different. So I think that now the time has come when business has to take a leading role in addressing these issues. Otherwise, I'm not sure that we will be successful. I mean, again, the governments have been trying to do this for the last 50, 60 years at least, and you see where we are. And also one very important thing, I just look at the Edelman Trust Barometer. It seems that today people trust business leaders to do more than actually they trust governments and public officials. So I think that we do have the responsibility to take this on.
So we're going to go in a few minutes to some questions, and a reminder, those of you who are watching, do please post them using the slido.com app. You can see the details here on the screen. And also give us your wider views on what more needs to be done and how important it is, in your view, to increase the focus around responsible or sustainable focused business education. But Enrico, there was a question here about more examples of case studies. A reminder, of course, that people can look at the shortlist as well as the winners that the FT's awards have highlighted in this field. And it's interesting that also a number of the big case libraries like Harvard and the Case Center and Ivy are increasingly tagging and developing collections of cases around some of these issues like sustainability. But Enrico, you wanted to come back with a couple of examples?
Yeah, so thank you, Andrew. So I think this is a very great question. So we have, for example, in our courses, we try actually to showcase our research and to make sure students can, for example, think about extensions or revisiting, for example, some of the challenges encountered in what we developed. So examples of case studies might be related, for example, to climate de-risking solutions in emerging countries, for example, with application to different value chains, agriculture being an important example. We also have, we try to keep students abreast of regulatory developments. For example, I do run in my courses case studies on climate stress testing from both a regulatory perspective, but also from the point of view of financial institutions who would like to do these exercises as thoroughly as possible. We do have case studies, for example, on asset management and, for example, the development of net zero strategies, so that students can understand the big challenges and also the areas of contentions around the definition of what net zero means. And this is something that clearly originates from research being carried out by faculty, but at the same time, there's huge demand from students themselves to actually, to work full on these topics, and they seem to be extremely successful then in the job market placement, because of course, this is exactly what corporates are looking for.
So I see there's also a couple of questions have come up here from viewers about rankings, including the FT's own ranking of business schools, which, as we know, includes quite a significant weighting for salary outcomes. And I should say, instead of the FT, as people may know, has been reviewing the methodology to see, and we in principle are going to reduce the weighting that we give to salaries. The big challenge is what to put in its place. In other words, what consistent, objective metrics could provide additional assessments of value. Maybe coming back initially to you, Andre, on that, from the perspective of companies interacting with business schools, how is your and your peers' thinking evolving? Are there some different sorts of metrics that you're applying or that you would like to see that would help assess which business schools you engage with to recruit or for thought leadership?
Well, Andrew, that's of course the fundamental question. I mean, every reward system, every remuneration system has to be based on 3 dimensions. How do you attract, how do you retain, and how do you motivate? As long as our humanity has decided that what matters is the material side of it, what matters is the immediate return, we're going to be hard pushed to change this. What we've done in our company is that we linked the boni of our leaders on a long-term period. So, for instance, our CEO's bonus is entirely paid in 10 years blocked shares, in order to really allow align ownership and the long-term success of the enterprise. It's a bit easier for us because we are a family-controlled business, and therefore our time horizon is by definition intergenerational. We go from one generation to the next. It's more difficult to recruit and attract and motivate people who do not necessarily have something to do with the company itself. But the real criteria, and I'm coming back to this, Larry Fink letter, so the chairman of BlackRock, the biggest asset manager on the planet, writing to the companies that they invest in, often in a passive way, by the way, but what they invest in, to say very, very clearly, we are not trying to become a sort of liberal left woke type of activity. What we're trying to do is to create a long-term value for the long-term beneficiary of the pension funds that we are managing on their behalf. And so whatever element you're going to use to measure success and to reward people, we'll have to have this component of long-term. And this is not because we enjoy nature. This is because, capitalism is a force that can manage the existing resources in the best possible manner. So there's no clear-cut answer to your question, Andrew. But I think that the key is this swap from the long term to the short term, or the opposite, from the short term to the long term. How can we incentivize on the long term?
Elisa, if you were to go back to business school now, or even if now in your current role and with your peers, you were looking to interact with business schools, are there any particular criteria that you would look for or you'd like to see to help you make that choice of where to go, who to recruit or engage with around the business education field?
There are some super practical ones, scholarships for people who don't come from a business background, often very few savings. And so scholarships to help with the tuition fees before you start your MBA, but also scholarships after the MBA. So I know INSEAD has those, for example, for students who decide to go in a ESG-related career and have a salary below a certain threshold. So yeah, just very, very practical, but that's actually very important. And otherwise, it's just impossible for many, many people. Then I think what I would look for is to make really sure that the business school means it when they talk about environmental sustainability, that it's not a form of greenwashing. And you can usually tell quite quickly if you dig a little bit. And yeah, that's the second most important, equally important as the first one.
Ilian, you want to come in on rankings and metrics?
I'm very happy with the FT rankings, so no complaints at this point, please. But no, seriously, I think that what is important if we want to integrate sustainability in the rankings, we have to look at the 4 dimensions. What do we do? Research is very important. It is very important for us to build a comprehensive and systematic understanding of how we integrate these issues into our business models. Without research, that's not possible. Teaching is very important. So that's the second pillar. The third pillar is the spread of all this information and engagement with the community and engagement with the alumni, but in general with the public. And the fourth, probably the most difficult pillar for many, is walk the talk. Making sure that the business school that you're ranking, Andrew, also not only teach and research these things, but they look at plastics and pledges for the carbon neutrality and so on. So this is, to me, if we are to integrate sustainability into the rankings, we have to go across these 4 dimensions.
Yes, and I should say, even in our responsible business education report today, you can see an attempt to try to compare some of the sustainability-related assessments of business schools, including one that we've been exploring that would look at carbon reporting within business schools themselves. Not perhaps a huge contribution to carbon emissions, but in terms of walking the talk, quite an important symbolic and demonstration example. Enrico, you wanted to come back in on the question of metrics, please.
Yeah, so a few very interesting questions on admissions, and any background, whether students, for example, had enough exposure to ESG issues before joining some of the courses we teach at the business school. So one of the most successful courses we launched recently at the business school tries to address this, right? So this is a course, for example, on climate change management and finance. So by definition, focused on climate change, but spreading a broad range of disciplines. And what we noticed, so this allowed us essentially to recruit from a broader pool of talent. And what we noticed essentially that the student experience is fantastically improved, and you're going to have students coming from more traditionally narrowly defined backgrounds. It could be, for example, business, economics, and those coming from natural sciences with a very strong interest in ESG related issues. And the complementarities and the way in which they can work together, for example, as teams on some of the case studies I mentioned, is extremely successful. So clearly there is a challenge from outside, because you need to define admission criteria. They need to be more diverse, right, and more complex, where you have several different dimensions to take into account, including a number of co-curricular activities that might have been carried out before. But that seems to be working very nicely for the students in particular. So we're very pleased about that.
So I'm going to shift a little bit to questions, and thank you for all those who've posted them. Do please continue to do so. There's one that comes back to a point Elisa made earlier. Perhaps I'll turn to you, Ilian. So do you feel the admissions process is accessible for people from non-business backgrounds? Does the GMAT, as that exam for entry, need an update to be more inclusive? Ilian.
Well, I mean, I think that GMAT is a proxy for making sure that the students can go through the program. It is, for us, it's not an admissions criteria in the sense that, okay, you have to have above 700 or 650 not to be admitted. We admit students with lower GMAT if we can have enough evidence from their background that they will not be struggling in the program. Because the worst case is that you admit somebody and they cannot finish the program. So to me, GMAT is a proxy. For many people, I would say, you are fine, I don't worry about you going through the program. Of course, there are a lot of other criteria to look at. I don't think that it is, if it is removed, it has to be supplemented with something else, right? You want to make sure that people will not be struggling through the program. Now, at INSEAD at least, and I'm sure that in other business schools as well, you have backgrounds from all kinds of places and all kinds of experiences. I mean, besides the 94 nationalities, but we have musicians, we have journalists, we have writers, we have people not just coming from business. Actually, business, I think the people with business degrees about 20% only of the MBA intake. So I think it's very important. It's very important that you have this diversity in backgrounds.
Andre, did you want to come back on that?
Well, I think that the example of Elisa is a very good example. I mean, she did do INSEAD, but she came from the Fauna and Flora International, which is one of the well-known NGO active in the sector. So I think diversity is a richness, and whatever level we look at, or by diversity is what we talk about. But it seems also to me that it is very important to be able, if you want to have a successful course, if you want to teach your graduates to be able to interact with society at large, and you need a big sample within the same organization. And INSEAD, in a certain extent, offers this, because you have different cultures meeting at the same time. But for me, what I wanted to say earlier on about ranking, or about, we're just asking the wrong question. I mean, we need to define success differently. If we set sales target once in the company, you already are getting into this financial logic. You're going to deliver me X turnover, so therefore you're going to get X times something salary. What we really ought to be talking about is aspirations. Is a very simple truism. The purpose of a company is not to make money. The making money is something that is a consequence of executing on your mission and serving your purpose properly. So identifying what the real externalities in the business are going forward seems to me much more important to be able to serve the mission, to be able to serve the careers of people participating. So we really do have an accounting problem. I'll just come back to this.
And a related question maybe to you, Andre, and then others, please come in. But how do you motivate investors around the short-term earnings versus the long-term perspective and measure sustainability within a multinational?
So again, I mean, you're going to think I'm obsessed with BlackRock, but I'm just going to quote you a sentence from the letters I read this morning. You know, we focus on sustainability not because we are environmentalists, but because we are capitalists and fiduciary servant to our customers. You know, in the long term, externality will be internalized, and if you don't sort of concentrate on creating value that has a sustainability criteria inbuilt, you will fail. I mean, if you look at the FTSE 100, or if you look at the big indexes, there are not that many big names which have survived the last 50 years. You know, the next 10 years could be even more dramatic in that context. And the financial industry plays an important role in that. So that's why I keep on referring to investors. Because, of course, if you manage other people's money, you have a fiduciary duty which extends far and above your conviction. So this is not about a group of woke people trying to protect nature. This is about building a new system which will allow us to get to long-term sustainability.
And Enrico, so is it possible to find some alternative measurement system and incentive structure to move away from the obsession with short-term earnings, do you think?
So I think it is possible, and we are making huge progress in that direction. If we think, for example, of buzzwords such as carbon footprint, that are just a snapshot, right, of the impact of a company to a large extent backward-looking, right? So we see now a much deeper understanding of a forward-looking perspective. It's about carbon footpaths, about how certain actions is going to impact not the environment just now, but for generations to come. And we see essentially companies building 100-year plus plans trying to factor in, discount these sort of effects. I think this is a massive improvement. And so I'm very optimistic that the activity we see out there and the efforts that are being made will provide the relevant incentives to move in that direction.
There's a broader question here about the scope for enhanced digital capabilities as an accelerator to drive sustainable solutions. Iliad, any views on that?
Well, I think that it's definitely a driver in many ways. The pandemic accelerated, obviously, this. We are now looking at some of the classes that we're doing online, reducing significantly the carbon footprint for people not actually flying to INSEAD in France or Singapore, but taking online. There are many different ways. There was obviously a lot of examples with how we can use machine learning, artificial intelligence, to create better outcomes, better systems. So it's a very, very broad question, and I think that it's a huge opportunity that we can take in order to ensure that we move in that path.
And of course, Ilian, at COP26, INSEAD, amongst a number of European schools, launched this joint initiative, didn't they, which actually offers for free training both to alumni and the wider community. That links into a question here: is there a platform for business schools to share resources and experiences to translate responsible education? What would be useful here, and what's out there already?
Yeah, I think that I want to mention two things. I think that here, first, the business school for climate leadership. So we are 8 business schools from European countries that decided that we are competing fiercely in many dimensions, but on this dimension, we have to cooperate. Because it's a problem that affects all of us. So we decided to create this platform. We're still growing it. We're trying to attract also other business schools to join us in these efforts. Because in my view, there are a lot of great ideas that normally will take some time to share across business schools or across the companies in terms of what are good models. But the second thing that we're doing now in the United Nations, the Principles for Responsible Management Education. A couple of years ago, I was appointed to chair the board of Prime. And with the new CEO, we are actually looking at how to create exactly this platform. So we have now 800 business schools that are members of Prime, out of 23,000, I think, a total number of business schools in the world. So we want to grow this platform. We want to revise the report that every school is submitting to Prime, so that anybody who wants to teach sustainability, who needs a case on energy efficiency or supply chains, can go on this platform and figure out, this is the curriculum, these are the cases that I can use. So this is still work in progress, but hopefully by the end of this calendar year, we'll have something to show at Prime and the business schools for climate leadership.
Thanks. We're really almost very much out of time. One sentence, Enrico, if there was one positive change that could help inject more focus on responsible business education into business schools, what would it be for you?
So to me, it would be the adding to the knowledge dissemination and the dialogue, the dimension, the dimension of problem solving. So ultimately, to show impact and to show that we're actually useful, we need to sit together with problem owners and try to make sure we work together toward a solution. So,
okay, thanks. Elisa, one sentence. What would you do?
All working together. Very simple.
Okay, perfect. And Andre, the final word to you, please.
Well, I'd like to, if you are going home tonight and you're going to talk about what you say today, I'd like to make one thing very clear, and that's something I've witnessed over my life. This is not about a bunch of people telling you we need to protect nature or save the environment. This is about creating a sustainable future for us all. The cost of inaction today is going to be colossal in the future. We need to reform the system, and the best way to reform the system is to release a cohort of leaders who are going to understand the real issue and are going to be able to make the path forward. So there is a bit of an elitistic nature to that speech, but I don't think that's what we should focus on here. What we should focus on here is the need for change. And the best way to change something is to redefine the way we work together. What we do need is a new social contract. We need a new humanity, which together is going to confront these issues we've barely sketched over the last hour, and are going to make humanity more prosperous. There is an opportunity. CO2 is, of course, a battle that's going to be a very strong one, but it's just a narrow piece of it. We are doing the same mistake if we focus on CO2 than if we mistake just on the financial system. So if you concentrate just on the financial system, we need a broad approach. So my last sentence will be embrace complexity. The future is not simple, and we will only be able to resolve it if we understand what complexity is a solution. Collaboration is a much better system than domination. We've tried domination, it didn't work.
So Andre, Ilian, Elisa, Enrico, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to InTent for its support for these inaugural awards. Thank you all of you for watching. A reminder to go to ft.com/RBE to follow the details, and do continue to engage and reflect and act around this important issue. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you to all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everybody.